Today's guest is Dr. Shawn Baker. Dr. Baker is a physician, author of the Carnivore Diet, and co-founder of the online medical clinic Rivero. Dr. Baker, welcome to the Primal Foundations podcast.
Well, hey, yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you and talk to the folks in your audience. So thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. I always say if there was a carnivore Mount Rushmore, you would be on it 100%.
Interesting. I don't know if we'll ever see that, but thanks. Appreciate that.
To kick off the podcast, could you share with the listeners, your journey of how you kind of started to embrace a carnivore diet and what sparked the shift of this new approach to nutrition?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm soon to be 58, so I've been an athlete my whole life. Of course, I had a career as a surgeon. I was quite busy, and somewhere in my, I guess, probably early 40s, I was just kind of feeling crappy. I was like, I'm getting older, and I just kind of was sort of like, I don't really want to feel old, and I don't, I mean, as a surgeon, you think you know more about health than other people do, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I was just not where I wanted to be. I mean, I was probably 200 and I don't know, close to 290 or something like that. I mean, I was strong, I was fit. I mean, I was physically active. I was winning world championships in different sports, Highland Games at that time, and I needed to be big for that. And I decided, hey man, I'm probably, in retrospect, I'm probably pre-diabetic. I probably have metabolic disease. I probably have sleep apnea. I'm just not, despite all the training and stuff like that, it doesn't behoove me to be this big anymore. And so I think at 42, I said, okay, I'm going to start focusing on leaning out, playing with nutrition. So I went on this very kind of calorically restricted, lower fat, high, fiber, lean protein diet. And I did lose weight. I mean, I managed to drop, I think, 50 pounds in about 3 months time, and I mean, I was exercising like a maniac. I was literally working out 3 times a day. I mean, you think as a surgeon, I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get a couple thousand jump ropes, go to work, see my patients. Lunch hour, I might work out. If I was in clinic, I had a little bit of a break. I could work out, and then I come home and put my kids to sleep, and play with my family, put my kids to sleep. Another couple thousand jump ropes. Did that for several months, plus a pretty significant caloric reduction. And so I lost the weight, got lean, and was absolutely friggin' miserable. I was like, this is not sustainable for me. And, it was kind of funny. The nurses were like, man, we really like the fat Dr. Baker because you're kind of an asshole right next. Because I was always grumpy, man. I was like, I was just like hungry, like shit. So I went from there to a paleo diet, which was kind of in vogue. This is back in the like 2012-ish time frame, I think, something like that. And then I started to sort of look more into nutrition. I started reading about it. I read a couple books that were of interest. I kind of got turned on to a low carb approach, tried that. Eventually went on a ketogenic diet somewhere in probably 2013, maybe early 2014. I can't remember exactly the dates now. And I felt for the first time it was kind of a shift in my hunger. I was like, wow, I'm kind of I'm not that hungry, because I'd always been a guy. I mean, I was a guy that was easily putting away 6, 7, 8,000 calories a day. That was routine for me to go out there and crush. Just ate a ton because I was active. I was working out all the time, training hard and eating hard. And to go from that to like, well, I'm not hungry was a weird thing for me. It was a weird revelation. And at that time, right about that time, we kind of came to a consensus among the local orthopedic surgeons that we got too many damn fat people to operate on. They're all and obese people have a greater risk for complications. Doesn't matter what the surgery is, but with regard to like knee replacement surgery, higher rates of blood clots, higher rates of infections, worse outcomes in general, worse range of motion. And so we kind of said, well, we're going to try to discourage overweight people from having surgery, and so we would try to get them to lose weight prior to the surgery, so it would make their surgery less likely to have complications and hopefully a better recovery. And there was no sort of guidance on like what you should do. It was just like figure it out yourself. And I was like, well, I'm doing pretty damn good on this ketogenic diet. So I started offering that to my patients. And, like maybe 20% of the people would say, yeah, I'd try it. Most people aren't interested. They don't want to change their diet. And of the people that did that, I would generally see them back in about 2 weeks. I'd say, hey, let me check in back with you in about 2 weeks, see how you're doing. And surprisingly, what really surprised me, that it's a significant percentage of them who were literally on the schedule for knee replacement. They basically exhausted all the other non-operative interventions, or they'd had a knee scope or something like that. Nothing else left to them. And they had clearly bad arthritis on x-ray. And about, and a significant percentage of the people would come back to me, 2 weeks out and said, you know what, doc, I've lost maybe 2, 3 pounds, but my knee doesn't hurt anymore. And I was like, well, that's pretty weird because we've got you on the schedule for a knee replacement. So I started literally canceling surgeries because like you don't have pain anymore. There's no real reason for you to have this surgery if you don't have pain. You know, so that was sort of a wake up call to me. And then I kind of started talking to the hospital. I was head of the orthopedic department at the hospital I was at. I was one of the busiest surgeons in the whole state. And, I started talking to the hospital administrator. Said, hey, you know what? I'd like to spend, maybe half a day a week talking to people about lifestyle. And they basically flat out said, no, we don't want you to do that. And that really just kind of like, kind of set something off of me. I was like, why would you not want me to work, try to get people healthier so they don't need surgery? Well, it turns out, because they want the money from the revenue from those procedures. And that's what they wanted me there for. So, I mean, long story short, I eventually decided to just say, I'm just going to get away from that type of clinical medicine and do my own thing. And so then, so then a little bit after that, I was still very much engaged and interested in diets and low carb stuff. And there was this wacky group of people online. It was called Zeroing In on Health. It was a Facebook group run by a guy named Charles Washington, and they had a few thousand members, and they were all just eating meat. And I was like, what the F is this? This is nuts. I was like, but I mean, I was intrigued enough to where I kind of like followed along for like 6 months. I would just check in, ask a few questions, look at some of the material that they were recommending for reading. And I'd read the stuff. And I finally, back in 2016, I said, you know what, I'm going to try this. And so I started very slowly. I did like one meal. I said, I'll have steak and egg for breakfast, one meal and nothing else. And I didn't have my usual piece of whole grain toast or glass of orange juice or a little bit of fruit. And I was like, well, that wasn't that bad. I didn't really miss that stuff. And so then it went one meal, then it went one day, then 2 days, 3 days. And finally, sometime later in 2016, I did a whole month, and I was on Twitter at the time. And I had a couple thousand followers, not the size that I have these days. And I was just kind of goofing around and said, I'm going to do this all meat diet because I'd kind of been talking a little bit about it. I'm going to do it for 30 days. Surely I'm going to die. What am I going to die of? And I put a little survey. I said, am I going to get scurvy? Is my heart going to clog right up from all the saturated fat and cholesterol? Or is my colon going to fall out because, the bacteria are mad because there's no fiber and they're going to eat my colon? And, it was a joke, and I can't remember which poll won. I think somebody said my heart was going to clog up, um, but at the end of the 30 days, none of that had happened. And in fact, I felt freaking great. I was like, wow, this is literally the best I felt in, gosh, I don't know, 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years. And I remember that, I was, still training hard. I've trained my whole life. I've never stopped that. But I mean, I had some knee issues. I mean, I had some pretty significant quad tendonitis in my right knee, and it would prevent me from training like I wanted. Yeah, like there were days I couldn't squat, there were days I couldn't run, just because my knee would have been bugging me. And I just kind of accepted that. I'm just gonna have to deal with this the rest of my life. And then, what I noticed is that, and I had tried as an orthopedic surgeon, I kind of know every trick there is for tendonitis, how to treat it, different exercises, different, modalities. Nothing had really worked. So I kind of resigned myself that this is what it is to be a 50-year-old man. I was just almost 50 at that time. And within I remember it was like within 2 months, it went away completely. I mean, 1 month it was going away. And at the 1 month point, I remember I was like, well, I do that 1 month experiment. I'm going to go back to because I can't sustain it. Clearly, I can't sustain this. I'm going to go back to my kind of mixed diet. And so I went back, and literally within 24 hours, I started feeling like garbage again. I was like, shit, my back's kind of hurting, my knee's kind of hurting, my gut doesn't feel good, I don't have as much energy. And I was like, F that, man. I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing. My wife thought I was a little nutty. She's like, how long are you gonna do this for? I said, I don't know, let me try for another month. And then it turned into 6 months and then a year. And then so anyway, I go back to doing this and I'm feeling good. And I remember at the time I was doing these concept two rowing. And I just kind of got into that about a year ago because I was kind of switching sports because I went from I played high level rugby, in my 20s, and then I did some powerlifting where I was, I was a pretty decent powerlifter. I was nearly an 800-pound deadlifter as a drug-free guy back, one of my early 30s, and then got into doing some strongman stuff. So I was doing, that kind of the world's strongest man type events. I did a couple of those. Then I got into Highland Games, which is, you put a kilt on and you just throw crap. I don't know if you've ever seen
Yeah.
Highland Games or aware of that, but I won the world championship at that as a master guy. And then so I was like, well, I'm going to get into rowing. And I kind of was getting pretty good. I'd actually set an American record. This is while I was on a ketogenic diet. And I went carnivore. And then within like 6 months of carnivore, I was just smashing my times. And I didn't, my training hadn't changed at all. It was just due to the diet that I was like, I just feel like my recovery's better. I feel like I have a little more power and strength. And so I was able to set, several world, I think I set three world records at that time. It's like six American records or something along those lines. And so, I got, I was talking about this stuff. I convinced like 100 people online back in the day to try carnivore. And we collected all their data. I mean, we built a website for it. I remember there's another guy that helped me out. He was a guy from LA that was kind of savvy with web stuff. And he built and he was doing carnivore as well. It wasn't called Carnivore at the time, by the way. That came later. The name changed when I wrote the book. But so the zero carb diet, and we collected data on 100 people, and we didn't have any money. It was just like, hey, voluntarily, upload some data for us, track your weight, track your waist measurement, record your heart rate. We'll have some subjective measurements, rate 1 to 5, what your digestion is, what your mental health is, your sleep is, your sexual function, all that. And, 100 people, I mean, the average person lost 30 pounds. The average person lost 8 centimeters on their waist. Their heart rate went down by, I think, 8 to 10 beats. We tracked tracked the number of bowel movements they're having. They were having like 1.2 bowel movements average per day, so like every 6 days, 5 days, they would have 6 bowel movements or something like that. And all their subjective measurements got better. And then I guess Rogan somehow got wind of some of this stuff and thought I was an interesting guy, asked me to come on. And, I was living in California at the time, and his studio was at that time in Woodland Hills in California. He said, hey, here's the address, just meet me on this day. And I rolled in there, and I didn't know, I really didn't pay attention to podcasts that much. I wasn't really into that stuff. I didn't realize how big of an impact he had at that time. This is back in 2017. Obviously he's grown even more since then. And the second time I was on, there was kind of a different experience. But so anyway, that kind of got me on the radar of a lot of people. A lot of people didn't like it, particularly the vegan population. They thought I was like the Antichrist. Oh my God, this guy's telling people to eat meat. How crazy is that? So I got a lot of just hatred, and I'm the worst guy in the world. And I'm like, all I'm doing is I've got this interesting observation. I think it could help people. That's where I'm coming from. And so now it's been 8 years later, I guess. Gosh, 8 years. Yeah, it was 2016 when I started, so I'm 2024. So I'm about 8 years into this, and I'm still plugging away, and it's not dead yet. And we've seen this carnivore move. Oh yeah, so it was called a zero carb diet at the time. A publisher contacted me after I was on Rogan and said, hey, could you please write a book about this stuff? And I'm like, man, I'm not an author. I don't like, I hate writing, right? Honestly, it's just so friggin', I gotta sit down and write stuff. But I did it. They said, we need you to produce, like, well, I'll just write a book. I can do it in like one page. Here, eat a bunch of steak, done, right? But that's, they said, well, it's got to be 60,000 words. I'm like, oh shit, what am I gonna write for 60,000 words? And so, but anyway, the book turned out pretty good. I mean, a lot of people have enjoyed it. I think it ended up, I guess, I try to be a little bit humorous, try to keep it educational, informative, science backed as much as possible, and write it in a style that most people can understand. So I think a lot of people have enjoyed that book. So it's called The Carnivore Diet by me, Dr. Shawn Baker. Still doing well, still selling well, which is kind of cool. So anyway, now it's 8 years later, and I think, gosh, I think there are now probably hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people that have been not only exposed to the diet, but have tried it now. And in fact, you probably know Eddie Hall, World's Strongest Man, has just started. In fact, I'm gonna meet with him next week to discuss further, information on how I think how the insight I know as an athlete, because I've been able to perform at a very high level on this diet, and so I'm sure he has some questions regarding that. So anyway, that's a long preamble.
No, I mean the biggest, that Joe Rogan episode, I'm sure you couldn't fathom that it was going to make such an impact, and a lot of people to this day like trace their lineage of like when they learned about carnivore from that one podcast, and it just you couldn't even expect it to be so huge. But going on to that, the athletic piece, transitioning into that carnivore diet, not eating as much, I'm assuming, as you used to, like multiple times in a day as being an athlete and training like that. Was that kind of like a little bit messing with your mind a little bit of, am I going to have enough energy for these workouts?
Mm. I don't, because I'd already been on a ketogenic diet. So I was already used to the lower carbohydrate aspect of it. I don't know that my food consumption dropped drastically. I mean, I don't think it was that big of a change of what I was chronically adapted to. And this is a point I'll make. And I had the honor or the privilege of speaking in front of the National Strength Coaching Association at Sornex, Summer Strong. And it's not the official strength, it's just like an unofficial national strength coaches event where all these top collegiate strength coaches. And the point I make is that you're going to do best at what you're chronically adapted to from an energy source. And it takes a while to adapt to that. So what I saw was that I had already been adapted to a low carb diet for probably close to 2 years. So it wasn't that big of a physiologic shift for me. It was, I mean, I think my protein quality and amount went up a little bit, which I think is generally helpful for athletes. I think this is one of the problems where a standard ketogenic diet and standard ketogenics as they've been tested in the literature probably are under proteined. And so I think by bringing that protein, particularly the bioavailable, high quality protein that animal products provide in higher amounts, has a net positive effect on human physiology, particularly when it comes to athletic stuff. And so, um, I was not like I didn't really think that it was going to make me worse. I thought in my mind I could probably do better on this. And this is, in fact, that's the reason. I mean, I should go back. The reason I started this diet was for athletic benefit. I thought it would provide athletic benefits to me based on, looking at historical stuff. I mean, there's historical accounts of, athletes, a guy named, I guess his name was like Art Shrub or something. Like he was like around the turn of the 20th century. He was the world champion of running in like everything from 100 meters to like a marathon. I mean, he won every event. He was just a monster. He was like 100 meters, 500, 1,000, the 1 mile, the 10K. I mean, he was just winning everything. And his diet was basically meat. I mean, he basically was on as close to a carnivore diet as you could have been back then. He ate very little carbohydrate. There was history of, boxers would be eating steaks and, some eating raw heart before they go box. I mean, so I was like, I had some expectation that it would improve my athletic performance. And I mean, I didn't have any trouble eating enough. And I think that's one of the issues a lot of athletes run into. They just can't eat enough. And that's never been an issue for me. I can put it away, man. I mean, I literally was, God, I was, I was in this conference in Nashville 2 or 3 weeks ago and they had a tomahawk ribeye eating contest. And I'm literally
I
like,
saw
yeah,
that.
yeah, I'm literally like trying to lean out. I'm like, man, I'm not trying to eat much now, guys. And I was like, but I mean, they threw me in there and it's competitive and I'm real competitive. All right, shit, I'll just do it. And I won the thing. I ate like 6 pounds of steak in like 30 minutes.
Holy
So, I mean,
crap.
it's like I can put it away. So I don't have an issue getting enough because, even when you look at like the ISSN, the International Society for Strength or International Society for Sports and Nutrition, just published a paper comparing, standard carb diets versus ketogenic diets. And they said basically that, it's either neutral or negative, but the negative most likely when it comes to a low carb diet is the fact that they tend to underconsume calories and energy. So I think if you just, because one of the benefits of a ketogenic diet, so to speak, or a low carb diet is some people will just naturally not eat as much. It puts them more easily into a caloric deficit. It's more easy for them to maintain. So if you can override that and make sure you can eat enough, then I don't think I don't think it's certainly inferior. I think in my case it's superior. I mean, I know how I felt before. I know how I felt now. And the fact that I'm, almost 60, I've got dunking basketballs and running sub 60-second 400s and 13 seconds 100 meters and all these things on my menu because I believe I can do those things just because of the way I feel. If you'd asked me that at 45, I'd be no way in hell I'd be doing this because I felt like garbage, and my diet wasn't junk. I mean, it was still high protein, quality carbohydrates. And I just didn't feel as good. So
Yeah, you look at like a Zach Bitter, right? He's the 100-mile indoor record, mostly a ketogenic diet, especially those endurance races. A lot of those athletes, um, it's really going against the grain to have a low carbohydrate diet. And some people, you have the best people in the world on a high carb diet, gel blocks, gel shots, all that stuff, carbo loading. But I kind of look at, after they're racing, there's a lot of athletes that end up being pre-diabetic. They might be some of the top athletes in their events. And yet when they get out of racing over the years and years of over consuming, they're talking they're pre-diabetic, but they've been an athletic stud their entire life. So there's kind of all of this like, what's going to be better for the long term. But yeah, switching and building muscle is one topic that I always get from people. Like, you can't really build muscle on a carnivore diet. But I always look at you and also like Dr. Chafee. I'm like, look at Shawn Baker and Anthony Chafee. Those guys are huge. They don't. It doesn't seem like you guys have a problem putting muscle on the
Yeah, I
carnivore
mean,
diet.
I'm 260 right now. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
260. I, since I've been on this diet, and I started right before I turned 50. So, I mean, almost 8 years now, I've put on about 10 pounds of muscle, which, I mean, it's not that much, but considering I've got
it's a lot.
45 years of training experience and I'm in my 50s and I don't take TRT, I'm not all this stuff that everybody's saying, oh, you must be taking all these drugs. I don't do it. I mean, yes, there's a lot of training goes in. I bust my ass. Anybody see me? I mean, I post most of my workouts, or at least segments of them. I'm in there every day busting my ass. But the nutrition supports it. I mean, again, when you look at the literature on muscle protein muscle protein synthesis, I mean, Stu Phillips has published on. There's, Jose Antonio, Don Layman, all these guys. I've interviewed all those guys. I talked to them. These are some of the top researchers in the world. They say basically it comes down, number one, training. Training is by far the most important lever. You've got to train consistently. Number two is adequate protein, adequate leucine, complete amino acids. You get that. And then the next thing is just enough energy. And it doesn't matter if it's carbs or fat. It doesn't really matter. You can build muscle on either. Now, it can be easier to do it on carbs because carbs taste good. Carbs are easy to consume. You don't get full as easily on carbohydrates. So it's more easy for you to get into a caloric surplus in that situation for sure. There's some potential benefits for performance. Some people will feel like it higher blood glucose, potentially intramuscular glycogen has some positive, training effects, but you don't have to have that to do those things, and I think, again, this goes to chronic adaptation. When we see the studies on low carb diets, there's only like two studies after they're more than 6 weeks long. And so, like I said, it's what you're chronically adapted to. If you've been chronically adapted to consuming carbohydrates for 30, 40 years, it ain't happening in a couple weeks or a couple months or even maybe 6 months to a year. It may take you that long to fully adapt to this. It's like learning a new sport. You don't become an expert on a new sport. Your body has to learn how to play a new metabolism in a way. And that doesn't, you don't get really, really efficient at it. You can get some of the basics down initially. You can teach somebody to play tennis and they can, hit the ball back, but they're not going to be, entering the friggin' US Open for 10 years. I mean, I mean, I think there's some of this learning that occurs even with what we're chronically habituated to. So, I mean, it's interesting, and we're seeing more and more well, it'll be interesting how Eddie Hall does with this. Like you said, as I mentioned, he's doing this carnivore diet now. I mean, he's doing it for the purpose of losing weight, but I suspect his performance, if he does it and implements it correctly, and he gets enough calories, he'll be fine, or should be, if he allows himself to adapt.
Yeah. Now going into like kind of the other aspect, somebody who is metabolically unhealthy, right? That wants to transition to a carnivore diet, not just the typical person that's already healthy or just wants to lose like 5 pounds. What are some of the significant changes or experiences that might occur when they start out?
Well, I mean, if they're chronically adapted to a high carbohydrate diet, a couple things will happen. First thing is, you will probably be exposed to lower amounts of overall insulin in your body. Insulin will cause the kidneys to retain fluid and water, fluid and salt, right? And so you'll have a natural diuresis or natriuresis where sodium and water leave your body. So you'll become relatively dehydrated potentially if you don't mitigate that. So you might have to increase your fluid intake, increase your electrolyte intake or your salt intake. You will see a profound change in your digestive system. A lot of people report to diarrhea or just that they don't go to the bathroom as much. And that's not like you're constipated. It's just that you're no longer wasting stuff. I mean, you're literally absorbing everything you put in your mouth. And, it's kind of funny because when you go on a plant-based high fiber diet, a lot of that nutrition that you put in your mouth ends up in the toilet. It's just like, it's almost like a waste of money. You're like, you spend all this money on organic fruits and vegetables, and a significant percentage of that nutrition ends up in the toilet because you can't absorb it. And we sort of think, oh, that's a great way to lose weight. Yeah, like I guess, but I mean, it'd be better if you nourished yourself and your appetite was less. I mean, that would be probably a better way to do it. And that's what we tend to see happening here. The other thing that many people have to be mindful of is fat. Because if you're not consuming carbohydrates, then all of a sudden you got to get energy from somewhere. Protein's not the best source. I mean, we do have the capacity to turn protein into energy, via either via ketone production or glucose production, but it's relatively inefficient. So fat becomes more important. And then, some people will get in, well, I got to eat all this fat. And they start eating sticks of butter and all this stuff that I think is maybe sometimes over the top for a lot of people. And so they end up with fat malabsorption. And so now they're crapping all the fat into the toilet, which is the same issue. It's like, why you shouldn't be wanting to eat stuff where it ends up in the toilet. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess I mean, it's kind of like a bulimia type of situation. Well, if you just gorge and then puke, yeah, I mean, you get the experience of eating a lot, but it's not good for you to do that. It's not how we're designed. We're supposed to eat food, absorb it, get nourished, and then move on, right? And until the next time we get hungry. And that's how we're designed. But we've bastardized the food system so badly that that doesn't work anymore. I mean, we eat stuff that doesn't nourish us, and we're constantly hungry, and we're over. Fat people are malnourished. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, it's just like, even though you think, well, they got too many calories. Yeah, they do, but they don't have enough nutrition. And there's a difference between the two. What else is it going on with this? I think that you're going to be eating more protein. I mean, for the most part, the average American eats somewhere between about 12 and 16% of their calories come from protein. Probably the average person on a carnivore diet is eating probably between 20 and 40%. So you see a significant increase in your, relative protein percentage and absolute amounts typically. And so that comes with certain physiological changes that occur. I mean, some of the good things, you often tend to more easily retain, or you have more building material to build muscle, to build skin, to build organs, to build bone mineral density, or bone density rather. Um, you sometimes NEAT goes up. So what I'm doing here, this non-exercise activity thermogenesis, you just get more fidgety. Um, you know, you've got to deal with protein. I mean, obviously, a lot of protein goes to structure. Some of it goes to energy. And when you convert protein to energy, whether it be ketones or carbohydrates, that extra the nitrogen that's left over has to be dealt with, and that turns initially into ammonia, which is actually toxic to us. If ammonia builds up, we get all kinds of issues. So, but fortunately, we have this urea cycle where we can convert that ammonia to urea, and then we excrete it. We excrete it through respiratory vapor, sweating, urination, feces, things like that. The problem is, high protein, particularly at nights. I try to dissuade people from doing that because, if during the daytime I have to get rid of this urea, I just walk to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. If I have to do it at night, it kind of jacks up my sleep, and then I've got to, wake up to go to the bathroom, and then I may or may not get back to sleep, and then I wake up the next day, and we know that a night with poor sleep yields greater insulin resistance for the day, and so you end up having to deal with that all day long. And so, yeah, there's some of the things that are going on.
Now, do you eat, for you in particular, are you a fan of like the OMAD method, or you're eating multiple times a day, just kind of excluding that nighttime time frame?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on my goal at the time, and uh, for the vast majority of the time, I tend to eat twice a day. I tend to eat relatively early in the day most of the time. Like I said, I mean, typically for me it would be like I mentioned, I just had a pretty nice size ribeye right before it came in.
Six
Uh,
pounds?
no, it was like a little pound and a half or something like that. But I uh I will typically, again, this is me for me. I will eat, because my schedule, the way my schedule works, I usually have meetings in the morning and stuff. So I have a break around 11 a.m. and I usually crush some kind of steak or something like that. And then I'll probably eat again on most days in that situation. I would probably eat again around 6 p.m., something like that. And it would be something smaller, and I would try to go to bed by 10ish or something like that. So that would be kind of a typical day for me. But I've gone to periods of times where I'll eat one meal a day. I've gone period of times where I'll eat three or four, depending. Like if I'm trying to gain weight on this diet, and there have been times when I try to do, I went from, I think, I don't know, where I got down to an all-time low in 2020, I think it was down around 210. Gosh, I was so thin. I remember I was doing this experiment where I was playing with high fat, lower protein, just playing with glucose numbers and seeing how low I could get my glucose. And I mean, I got really lean and then I got skinny. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So then I'm just going to start eating back up. And so it took me like, gosh, I remember I went from 210 to like 260, but it took me like 3 months. I mean, didn't take me that long to put it back on. I was like, oh yeah, you just
Yeah.
pick out. And so I've sat at about 260 for the last 2 years. Got strong. I'm strong right now, man. I'm like, like as strong as I've been in 15 years at least right now. I'm pulling deadlifting 500 pounds for a set of 10, no belt, no straps, just hook grip, no bouncing, just, so I mean, that's pretty good for my age, for, especially for guys that aren't taking drugs and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, I tend to, um, you know, I can it's kind of easy to shift it between. It's not hard for me to fast longer. It's not, I mean, it just makes it easier. I don't have to deal with tremendous hunger cravings, and I can eat more if I want to. So it's not that much of a struggle.
Yeah, and it's also lifestyle too, right? Like if you're busy, and you got to skip a meal for the day and you're gonna have to eat a little bit later, like you don't really have a problem of the constant being hungry all the time, which is a
Yeah, it's like when I
for
travel,
yeah,
like when like I'm on a plane and when I'm on a plane, like I got to get on a plane on Friday. I'll fly to Amsterdam, but I probably won't eat. I mean, because I'm not doing it. I'm literally just sitting there. So I'm like, I don't
yeah,
really need any nutrition in that setting. So I often fast on planes because usually they come by and they bring you, it's like it seems
yeah.
like every hour they're bringing cookies. Here, you want a cookie? You want a snack? You want some potato? I'm like, no, I don't want that crap. Like, get it, give me a glass of water maybe. But yeah, so I mean, it seems to be very easy to adapt to the needs of the situation. And when I'm training like a maniac and my appetite goes up and then I just eat more. And it just makes sense. It goes with how we're designed, and like I said, I think a very natural way to eat, in comparison to the highly synthesized synthetic food that's designed to addict us and to make us overeat it and, whatever. I mean, it's a real problem that we have with our food system.
And talking about the types of food in particular, some people they think that carnivores exclusively are consuming grass-fed, grass-finished steaks from Regenerative Farm, and you're eating animal organs. Is there a significant nutrition difference between grass-fed and grain-fed, and also like how essential are animal organs for a carnivore diet?
Yeah, so those are great questions. So, yes, there are nutritional differences between a grass-finished animal and a grain-finished animals. Yes, the organ meats have different properties, different concentrations of nutrients. But as far as what does that mean clinically for the average person, I've been very interested in this discussion for many years. I've asked this. When Harvard did their carnivore study back in 2021, I specifically asked David Ludwig and Belinda Leonard, the researchers, to please include questions about grass-finished versus grain-finished beef, because I had asked that question to some 12,000 people on this diet. And the outcomes really don't show much of a difference. I mean, there's like no difference between outcomes, like people reversing disease and losing weight. They can do it on either of them. Now, if you look at it on paper, you can say grass-finished beef has more conjugated linoleic acid, which theoretically is beneficial to the heart. They've got more an absolute increased amount of omega-3 fatty acid, which could be potentially beneficial. They've got higher concentrations of vitamin E and some of these other things. But I mean, when we look at it clinically, and there's been almost no testing ever done in humans on these questions. There was a study that Texas A&M did about 10 years ago. They looked at grass-finished beef versus grain-finished ground beef. They fed it to people for like 6 weeks, and then they checked some like lipid biomarkers, and they found essentially no difference. In fact, the grain-finished people had maybe slightly better, higher HDL or something like that. So it's unclear that there's any major differences in there as far as its effect on human health. There's guys like Stefan Van Vliet at University of Utah, or he might be at Utah State. I can't remember, one of those two. Fred Provenza, who is at Duke, looking at the unique differences between the way animals are raised. And again, it's clear. I mean, and it's not just how they're finished. It's the breed of the animal. It's the sex of the animal. It's the age of the animal. It's the location of the animal. It's the time of the year. All these things impact the nutritional profile of these animals. And so, it's not just how's it finished. There's other things that go into this. But, that's, where I'm at right now. I'm saying eat what you like, because whatever, if you don't like the way grain finished or grass finished beef tastes, and a lot of people don't, they say it tastes too lean or gamey or fishy, they're not going to eat it. So any diet in which like I said, for any diet to be sustainable, it has to be, one, the food has to be enjoyable. Two, it has to be, you can't be hungry all the time. I mean, if you're hungry all the time or not enjoying the food, you're never going to stick to that. I don't care. I mean, you could have the discipline of, Jocko Willink, discipline. You're going to fail eventually at some point when you're hungry all the time. So it just doesn't work. So you got to figure that out. The other question about organ meats, are they essential? My direct experience with thousands and thousands of people know is no, they're not essential. Could they be conditionally beneficial for some people? Yeah, I mean, for some. I mean, but like I said, it's interesting how this sort of carnivore movement had evolved. When I got exposed to this, I was talking to people that have been doing this diet for 10 years, 15 years, some of them in some cases 20 years. And that topic came up, how essential are organ meats? And almost without exception, all those people say they're not essential. In fact, most people that end up eating a bunch of organ meats end up quitting the diet anyway. And so then we had some proponents that came out and saying, "Oh, organs are essential and the greatest thing in the world." And see how these people in these indigenous tribes are out there eating monkey testicles and all. It's just all this sort of kind of crazy stuff to say, "Oh, this is what our ancestors were doing," when there's no way of knowing that. I mean, and in fact, if you talk to any hunter, what's the first thing they do? They gut the animal, throw that shit away, and haul in the rest of the stuff. They're not in there like digging through and saving the lungs and saving the pancreas. Most of it, let some animal eat that stuff. I mean, that's what really has probably happened for most of them, because it doesn't transport well. I don't know. It's not easy to preserve liver out in the middle of the woods for more than a few hours. I mean, and then it starts going bad pretty quick. So, I hate seeing people feeling convinced that they must eat these organs to be fully able to thrive, when there's no real indication that's the case. And again, Harvard study, same thing. Harvard University study, from my data, 12,000 people. Both of us came to the conclusion organ meats made no difference in outcomes, right? So you got people out there telling, well, you got to eat these things that are kind of disgusting and you don't like and they don't taste good. You can either freeze them or boil them in milk or do all these things to make them palatable, or you can buy my 3,000% marked up pills, right?
Yeah.
So you think you're getting all this benefit from this stuff, and it's mostly just marketing BS, quite honestly. I think you can do fine on steak and eggs, man. I think, or just steak, for that matter. And some people that say, well, I didn't because I got cramps and I had to add fruit and stuff like that. Well, most of those people were probably trying to be too lean and too skinny and not eating enough. And that's what I see a lot of times. It's this obsession with being 0% body fat. I mean, I'm kind of being a little facetious there, but I mean, if you do look at any indigenous tribe, they're not ripped. I mean, none of those guys are walking around at, 5% body fat. I mean, that's just not the normal human state. And so to say that, I want to be that, and I get it. I mean, as an athlete, carrying excess body fat doesn't help you unless you're a sumo wrestler, or, offensive lineman or something like that. But I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's a lot of marketing hype, and I try to, um, as much as I'm this crazy guy in nutrition, I'm very skeptical about most things, and I'm very, if you listen to me talk, I'm not here saying this is the best or that's the best, or oh, you always got to do this, you can never do this. I use this, and the way I promote this diet is, it is a therapeutic treatment protocol from my perspective. My primary concern is not athletics, even though I'm an athlete myself, and I certainly feel it benefits me. But my primary concern is disease, health. As a physician, I mean, I'm trained to be a physician. I'm trying to do what I was trained to do, and so I look at it as, hey, do the diet for 3 months, 6 months, fix your damn health problems, and then figure out what's sustainable for you over the long term. And it might be carnivore. It could be. A lot of people do. But a lot of people, what most people end up doing is they'll do this diet, they'll cure whatever problem, whether it's Crohn's disease or psoriasis or, depression, they'll feel better. And then they'll find some level of point where they can maintain it alone. Most people still eat a ton of meat. That's what they have. They're still like, this is the important part of this when you talk about this question, because so many of us have been propagandized to believe that red meat is killing us and it's bad for us and we should minimize it. And then you have people that only eat meat, only eat red meat, and their diabetes goes away, and every friggin' medical problem they've ever had in their life has gone away. They feel the best they've had in decades, perhaps, They don't believe that anymore because they're like, if it's bad for me, why am I so damn healthy now? It doesn't make sense. So you get those people to do that, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, I know one thing I learned about, at least in my body, that red meat is fine for me. And I think the majority of people would find that if they were to do that. Because a lot of people are skeptical and doubtful, and but I don't, again, I'm not here to say one diet is better than the other. I'm here to say this is an option to help you, potentially. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. Hopefully, it'll teach people that red meat isn't the enemy. It's probably the processed garbage, which would make the most sense. I mean, we've been eating red meat since we've been human beings. We've been eating red meat, and that's debated. If you want to argue that Homo habilis are the first humans, and that was 2.8 million years ago. We've been eating meat since then. Or you want to say Homo sapiens, 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. If you're a creationist, 6,000 years, or whatever the Bible says. We've always eaten this product, and we haven't always been morbidly obese with diabetes and mental health issues and autoimmune disease and cardiac disease and cancers. That has been an infrequent finding through the vast history of man. And now it is just all too frequent. We've got, 70% of our population obese or overweight, 12, 11% of our population right now is frankly diabetic, and 50% are pre-diabetic. So we're in a really weird time, because of all the crazy food we have.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Just so happens that the industrialization of our food, all of a sudden, disease, spikes up dramatically. Like you were saying before, we've been eating like this for thousands and thousands of years. And going back to this fear as well, and that's why I want to bring up this next topic, which is the favorite topic when you talk about the carnivore diet, is cholesterol, right? Many people, they really worry about consuming large amounts of red meat because the concerns of heart disease or the raise in their LDL. So, is the increase in the LDL something to be concerned about, or is it not necessarily a bad thing?
Well, it's not something to ignore. I'll be the first one to say that, and I never tell people to ignore that because LDL cholesterol certainly can be a risk factor, right? And probably in the vast majority of the people, it is a risk factor, right? The problem is the vast majority of people are metabolically unwell as well, and I think that overlap drives much of the disease process. And so I think we sort of look at the things we can treat with drugs, and that's what we've been focusing on for the last 50 years, to enormous process. I mean, statin drugs, for instance, that class of drug has profited over $1 trillion at this point. It's huge, right? So I think that one of the things we're starting to look at, I mean, there was a great meta-analysis done by Adrian Sotomoda back in January of this year, looking at why do people that go on low-carb diets see their LDL cholesterol come up. And the most predictive, by far the most powerful factor was as people get leaner, right? And generally, when you think about people getting leaner, it usually means, yeah, they're getting healthier, right? But that fact alone, like if you're obese on a low carb diet, very often, more often than not, your cholesterol will actually go down, right? But once you start getting lean, then we start seeing an elevation sometimes. And sometimes they're really high numbers. And so the question is, does that, in that situation, when you're lean and presumably metabolically healthy, does that increase your risk of cardiovascular disease? And I think the real answer to that right now is we don't know yet. There's data coming out. There's studies that like Matt Budoff at UCLA is doing, which are
Mhm.
showing that maybe it doesn't cause heart disease. I mean, because we know. I mean, there's a huge study in Denmark in 2020. I want to say 2023, the Western Denmark Heart Registry study, I believe. It's done by Mortensen. And basically what they showed is like 60% of the population that had something called FH, familial hypercholesterolemia. These are people that genetically have super high cholesterol, right? 60% of that population with super high cholesterol from birth did not have increased levels of heart disease. So it's like, well, if 60% of the people don't have heart disease, and you're saying that LDL cholesterol is the main factor, why did 60% of these people not present with heart disease? So to me, it seems to point to the fact that LDL cholesterol or ApoB or whatever metric you want to use in that sort of framework, it becomes a dependent risk factor. So it means it depends on what else might be going on. And so we're trying to elucidate what are those other factors. And it could be that it's, obesity, visceral fat. It could be triglycerides and HDL and inflammation and blood pressure and all those, and absence of metabolic syndrome, all those things which are things we can control with diet, lifestyle, and exercise. Again, those things, um, up to this point have not been profitable. Now, what you're going to see, my prediction, it's already starting to come true, as these GLP-1 drugs, these Ozempics and stuff like that, are becoming wildly popular for weight loss, and they were initially used for diabetics. Those are showing some efficacy with regard to cardiovascular disease. And so that is more of the metabolic side. We're seeing that, that now that we have a drug that can do this, guess what? Guess where the theory of heart disease is going to go? It's going to go to this fact that metabolic disease is just as important because they can make money off of it. This is the cynic in me. And I know it says it. Until they get a drug where they can make billions and billions of dollars for, they're not gonna promote that theory. But once the drug is profitable or potentially profitable, then they'll be like driving that theory really hard, and again, you can get many of the benefits from these drugs just by fixing your diet and lifestyle, and I think that's something that, you get these people that are such drug cheerleaders, and it kind of sickens me a little bit to see these doctors. It's like, oh, this is like the second coming of Christ or something like that. It's like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world. And meanwhile, there's, I just interviewed a doctor today. I got all kinds of patients in my hospital. They're being checked in from side effects from these drugs. They're having intractable vomiting. They're having bowel obstructions. They're having horrible, horrible constipation where have to get hospitalized. And so, we'll see. We'll see how these things go. But in my mind, because they're very profitable, $1,000 a month for an Ozempic shot, right? I mean, that's where we're going to see more and more of the science going, because the science is always there to support the money, right? The money sort of drives the science in many ways.
Yeah, just lifestyle change, man. Like that's the biggest thing. It's now that is the norm of give me the pill now, give me the quick fix now versus, you're kind of bucking against the system if you're just like, oh, I'm gonna eat healthy and I'm gonna work out. Like you don't have to we always joke with like people in my work. It's like my crew of people that I work with, like we always say, it's funny. We're in like the 1% of the most fittest people in the world. And the people, when we talk about that, they're like, that can't be right. I'm like, no, man. Like we're probably in the top 1% of the whole entire world of fitness. Like there's upper echelons of that, but it's just kind of crazy that this is going to be the new norm where, I need the quick fix. I need the pill. Give me the statin. And I've heard this too, and you maybe can speak more to that. The people that go on to statins, like the extended of their life is like up 4 days or something like that. I don't know if you've heard that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, the mortality benefit's about an extra 4 days of life.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. There's just so much around statins that's out there. A lot of, I mean, is it even beneficial for old people to be on it at all? I mean, there's all kinds of arguments. I mean, a recent meta-analysis showed that, statins are significantly likely to increase your risk for, insulin resistance and diabetes. And so it's like, which is the worst, lesser of two evils. And so, yeah, I mean, it's always going to be the problem with lifestyle is, the lifestyle that most physicians recommend is, the USDA food pyramid, eat more grains and fruits and vegetables and don't eat red meat. And that for most people is inherently dissatisfying. They have such dissatisfaction with trying to stick to that diet when there's ice cream and cookies and cakes and candies and all this processed food and energy that they're not getting on this other diet because it's relatively low in energy. They're like, I can't do it. It's not sustainable for me. So then everybody ignored this. Well, everybody said, well, there's no point. And this give you the pills. But if you say, hey, just eat steak and eggs, and you're like, well, shit, I can do that, and I'm satisfied. And now I don't want the cookies and cake. But then the doctor's saying, oh, you can't do that. You're going to have heart disease. So it's like, it's almost like it's by intent in many ways to demonize this stuff, because if you demonize animal products and specifically animal fats, guess what? Guess what the population substitutes it for? Well, they substitute it for chronic disease. But I mean, from a food standpoint, they substitute it with highly processed food. You think about margarine and butter. I mean, butter was out and margarine came in. Margarine's just, and everybody realizes now margarine's garbage. But the same thing, when we remove meat from the diet, we always replace it with, now, there's a few like, oh, I'm a whole food vegan. I only eat, I mean, there's a few of those, but the vast majority of the people are just going to consume more processed slop. I mean, every study that's looked at this shows that the more plant-based you are, or that is, the less meat you consume, the more you tend to make up for it with ultra processed food, which is cheap, highly profitable, and just garbage for our health.
And kind of transitioning into kind of your project now, you initially had this kind of coaching program. It was called Meet RX, if
Mm.
I'm correct with that, and evolved into Rivero. And you used to have carnivore and coaching and fasting kind of certifications, and then also a hub of carnivore coaches. Why was there a move from moving carnivore coaches away from Rivero, and what is the current focus of Rivero now?
Yeah, so we realized if we were going to make a significant difference, like a real difference, we needed doctors on board. We needed to actually practice medicine because to legally be able to prescribe medicine, to de-prescribe medicines, to diagnose and treat, you've got to the way the healthcare system is required, the state licensing say you have to be medically licensed. And because we felt we could make a bigger difference with that, we could actually get people in, oversee their, because there are people that when they go on a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, if they're particularly sick and a lot of medications, it can be potentially tenuous for them. They can actually potentially have issues which might necessitate needs to go to the ER and things like that. So we want to make sure we have people that are skillful, that are clinicians that can handle that stuff, to know how to treat and deal with those things. And I think that is it's much harder to do. I got to tell you, man, we had to set up like found like 6 different LLCs in different states, and lots of regulations to get that stuff off the ground. So it's enormously challenging to develop an online digital health platform in all 50 states. And so the decision was basically, where can we do the greatest amount of good? Where's the greatest amount of need? And how do we really change the paradigm for healthcare? Because I think the healthcare system in the United States, I mean, unfortunately, I think it sucks. And at least with regard to the treatment of chronic disease. I mean, acute care, yeah, pretty good. If I break my leg, don't just tell me to eat steak. I mean, that's, I mean, take me to the damn ER so I get my leg friggin' plated or rotted or something like that. So, I mean, it's an effort to, as a physician, I was very frustrated, became very jaded with what I thought was a, money ahead of patients sort of paradigm. And that's not why I went into medicine. I mean, yeah, you want to get paid, and you feel like you have an expertise, and you should be paid well for that. But at the same time, I was like, gosh, I want to really make a difference. And our healthcare system does not, it's not, I wouldn't even say optimize. It's not even interested in that. So this is a way to hopefully change the paradigm. And I think my belief is that the market will dictate, in a free market society, which we theoretically live in, if you offer a better product that actually helps people and actually gets them well and not just chronically medicates them, like this disease management. When I went to medical school, when I first went into medical school back in 1989, the term disease management, I don't think was common. I don't remember hearing. I remember sometime later, a decade later, people started talking about disease management. And I was like, what is that? What is disease management? Well, what disease management means basically, you just maintain people in a perpetual state of disease and you just medicate their symptoms. That's not what I signed up for. I thought when I was a naive, 15, 16-year-old kid thinking about being a doctor, I thought I was going to be curing cancer and saving people. And when it turns out, and most physicians, come to this realization, all they're doing is like a hamster on a wheel. Here's the next drug. Here's your next drug. It's incredibly frustrating. And a lot of physicians are sick of it, quite honestly. We have hundreds of physicians that want to come work for us. And as we open up and we add more onto the roles, I mean, it's good because the practice is so much more fulfilling when you're actually getting people, like as an orthopedic surgeon. Yeah, I replace somebody's knee and they're like, hey doc, look, I can do all this and I feel better. Good, pet yourself on the back. But it is nothing like what I see when I say, people, look, I was literally on my deathbed. I was literally suicidally depressed. And now I'm back to my normal. I've got a life again. That is so much more, such a more greater magnitude of personally fulfilling than some of the other stuff. It's not as financially fulfilling yet, but it's certainly personally fulfilling. I'm very happy that I get to do this, and I feel very fortunate. And like I said, I'm excited for the future. I think that as we grow, I mean, we've got some like almost 13,000 members on our waiting list right now trying to get in. So we know
Wow.
the demand is there. And I suspect, hopefully we'll be serving not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands, even millions, and even millions of patients, over the coming years. And I think that's how we will change um, the way our healthcare. Because you look at our numbers across the rest of the year, we spend orders of magnitude more money on healthcare compared to many other countries, and yet our results are no better. In some cases, where our life expectancy numbers are looking like terrible, whereas the rest of the developed world is kind of trending up, we're trending down, and our costs are, 4, 5,
Outra-
6,
out,
7, 8, 10 times more, right?
outrageous, outrageous. I think it was like $4.8 billion they spent on healthcare in the
No,
United States.
trillion.
Oh,
No,
sorry,
that's
trillion
four,
dollars.
yeah, 4.5 trillion.
Even
That's
more.
2008 dollars. Yeah, so it's even more now. Yeah.
Jesus. What are some, with, Rivero taking off and everything, what are some upcoming projects or maybe even events that you're excited about?
Well, I'm most excited about research, getting research done. Yeah, because obviously one of the major criticisms about this particular diet, oh, there's no studies on this. I'm like, well, you know, one, they cost a lot of money to do. And so we've raised money for that. Our company's going to be doing some of that, fortunately, as we start to collect data. And to be clear, Rivero's not an only carnivore company. I mean, we use nutrition, personalized nutrition, elimination diets, low carb diets, other various diets. Some people will go carnivore. I mean, we had a lot of carnivores in our membership, but I mean, it's not like the only thing we do. But however, I think the nutrition side, the research side on this is important. So I've been working and pleading and cajoling various funding groups, particularly in the Cattlemen's Association, because these guys, I mean, literally they have skin in the game. It's like, there's people that want to put you guys out of business. And most people don't know that, but every year something like 20,000 ranchers go out of business in this country. 20,000 every year have gone out of business. And since, the mid 70s, we had something like 1.3 million individual ranchers. Now we're down to like 600,000. I mean, so those numbers are dwindling and dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And, at some point, who's going to feed us? So we gotta show that, one, not only is meat healthy and useful and there's a need for it, but then we've got to, figure out how to sustain it and make it going, because right now the average age of a rancher is like 63. There's not a lot of young folks getting into this, and so you gotta figure out who's gonna be feeding me, when I'm an old man, when I'm 90, or who's gonna feed my kids and my grandkids. So I'm excited about getting some of that research. In fact, there's a study that we will be publishing here, and probably, I mean, it's submitted to the journal. I think it's getting ready for final approval. We should have it out probably within a couple weeks. This is a study on a large case series on inflammatory bowel disease using carnivore, and as you may know, people get better,
Yeah.
significantly better. So yeah, I mean, it's a start. So that's one of the things I'm excited about. I mean, I've been asked to talk in a lot of different places, so it's cool speaking at and two different audiences. For years, I'd been speaking among the low carb crowd, and I mean, yeah, they all get. I mean, every time I go, when I first started going to these low carb conventions, 7 years ago or whatever it was, and talking, I was kind of like the nut job guy talking about carnivore, and there's a few other people. Now you go to those events, and they're all, I mean, half the damn audience is already on the carnivore diet. This is like,
Yeah.
like, how many of you guys are on carnivore? Half the people put their hands up. So it's taken over that demographic, so to speak. But now we're seeing, other people interested in that. So I'm getting invited to speak to various different populations, which I think, whether you agree with me or not, at least listen to the message, and I tell people, don't trust me at my word. You can do it yourself and see. I mean, there's the problem, right now, I mean, we live in a place where there's so much, it's hard to know what to try. Now with AI, I mean, who knows what's real now? I mean, they can make up anything, I can see it. This politician said, well, that's not even him. That's some made up AI figure, right? So, there's a lot of gaslighting going on. And so, but I mean, it's hard to gaslight somebody on their own health, because you can literally, I mean, if you lose 50 pounds, no one can deny that. If you literally aren't hurting anymore, that. No one can convince you that it's not. So the one nice thing is, rather than you like saying, well, is the climate getting warmer? Is it not? I don't know, man. I got no way to tell. I mean, it's hot in the summer, it's cold in the winter. It's all I know. It's like, so it's like, there's so much of that going on, but at least with your own personal health, you can verify things. And so if you don't believe what I say, and I don't expect you to, or anybody says for that matter, I don't think you should, but test it on yourself if you're interested, and then make your own conclusions. And either it'll work or it won't. If it works, great. Good for you. I'm glad you found something. If it doesn't, go find something else. No big deal to me.
Yeah, I encourage people all the time, if you do have some issues going on or you're looking to just kind of take back your health, eating red meat and steaks for 30 days isn't gonna, you know, e I had 30 days of steak, like, oh my gosh, so, like, I love that. That's, like, my diet anyways, but just to go and to try that, and then if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, but, it's kind of almost like pulling people out of the matrix a little bit. It's really tough for people to grasp this whole concept, but everybody majority of the people that I've gotten onto carnivore, within 3 to 4 days, they feel completely different. They feel way better than you talk about the knee pain, aches and pains goes away, and they want to stay on it, but giving yourself the 30 days and the permission to try this diet is a big thing to get over sometimes. And I know we got to wrap up because we're getting kind of to the time, but I want to end with a little speed round for you. So the first segment I'm doing this, so we'll see how good this is. This is a Shawn Baker speed round. So
Oh goodness.
I'm
All right.
a rattle of questions, a few questions, and you got to give me your number one answer. Okay. All right. Favorite cut of beef.
Ribeye steak.
Favorite strength exercise.
Deadlifting.
Favorite cardio exercise.
Sprinting.
Number one pump up song.
Oh gosh. That's a tough one. God, I don't know. I'd probably something from AC/DC or something like that would be reasonable. They all their songs sound the same. They figured out their formula, right? It's just anything, they all sound the same. They're all generally good. So yeah,
Back
anything from
him
AC/DC.
black.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that.
uh,
I'm an old guy too, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So that's my generation stuff.
Favorite movie.
Oh man, God, I don't know favorite movie. My kids ask me this all the time. I'll tell you, there's a funny movie. I used to like the Blues Brothers. That was a funny movie from back in the day. I don't know if you ever seen
Chicago,
that.
baby.
That's a good movie. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And this one you might have to think a couple seconds because you might piss off some people. What state has the best barbecue?
Oh, Texas.
Oh, just flat out.
Yeah, yeah. The Texas Central Barbecue, Central brisket in Texas is Central Texas brisket is unmatched in my view.
Would you say the best place in Texas for barbecue is then?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think if you go to Lockhart, Texas, that is the barbecue capital of Texas. They've got several in there. They've got Black's Terry Blacks. They've got a couple other ones. So one of those in there. I can't say. I mean, I'm partial to Terry Blacks in Austin. I've had theirs quite a bit. It's always good. They're actually one. I think right. I think by the end of this year they will be the number one most profitable restaurant in America, quite honestly.
Wow.
Yeah, I talked to the manager last time I was there a couple months ago. He said they're doing something like, I think they're projected to do like 60 or 70 million dollars in sales out of this one restaurant this year. So it's just ridiculous. And they got it done. They got it going on, man. They know how to get that barbecue out there. They said they go through like 500 briskets a day, which is
Yeah,
amazing.
I love the beef rib. I feel like
Yeah,
that's one of the
the beef rib is
it's
awesome. Yeah, you can't
very
beat that.
good.
That's tough to beat that one. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Baker, just I want to thank you for coming on and thanks for all the work incredible work you're doing and continue to do. If people want to get hold of you or follow you on social media, what's your social media handle for everybody?
Yeah, so Instagram is Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER 1967. I'm on Twitter and it's S Baker, both in capital. So S Baker MD on Twitter. I'm on YouTube, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. And what else is there? I guess I'm on Facebook, same thing. So, and then of course, uh, Rivero.com, Revero.com. Sign up on our waiting list if you need a doctor that you're interested in, somebody that's not going to tell you to eat, friggin' cardboard and take statins. Our doctors are kind of dialed in a little better for this type of stuff. And I'm there. In fact, I've got my meeting this afternoon. So once a week, I'm in there with our patients and, giving them a little rah, trying to motivation session is what I try to do. So that's how you can find me.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks again for coming on and thanks for everybody listening to another episode of the Primal Foundations podcast.